Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kell, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, the one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
So welcome back to the Small Church Podcast. We are glad that you've chosen to spend some of your time wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, wherever you may be listening, or however you may be listening, that you have chosen to spend some time with us and tune into our show. I'm here with my friend Robert Kell. And Robert, we are picking up today with part 2 of an episode that we started last week on church giving, tithing, finances, and all of the things that nobody wants to spend time talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, sometimes these episodes are like we just go long and we split them, and sometimes we actually kind of talk and then we get to a place and we both got places to be and we kind of come back and revisit. And this is one of those latter ones where we're coming back. And so mentally, I'm trying to jump through that hoop there. But Tony, you and I both have taught this for a long time, and I'm not saying you've done this, and I don't shy away from it. I'm not scared to teach, but I mean, I feel like I've spent the better part of my life trying to help people understand how help myself, not people, help myself understand how do you teach this and inspire people. We were talking off air just about the psychology of people's minds when it comes to what we listen to and why we listen to it and how we navigate things. And that's just an interesting part of this whole journey is, finances and money. And when it comes to tithing and generosity and our obedience to the scriptures, like the psychology behind that and why we do, why we don't is there. And I guess that's kind of where we were. And, I said, hey, I got two thoughts, and you were like, and that's a great place to stop. And we kind of jumped out the other day, and we were kind of in that part of talking about ice cream. And I had said something along the lines of just like, should we be spending money on, because I was talking about, 4 of us went to Minchie's and it cost $40 and so should we be spending money there? And we were having that discussion. And I think that the couple of things I was thinking about that I was just wanting to say is this, is one, I'm definitely talking about, personal versus the church. Like my personal life and what I'm doing versus where I'm obedient. And the tension is I think we separate those things more than we should sometimes. Like we talk about, like, there's nothing wrong with going to get ice cream. I said that last episode and things, but I think if we aren't, like, and this is kind of my second part, and then we'll kind of mesh these together and then you jump in and we'll go from there. But I think if we say we aren't able to tithe or we aren't tithing and we aren't being generous and faithful to what God, to honor God with what he's given us, I'm not convinced that we should be out enjoying like these moments of like, can I say selfishness? If we're not being generous to God, like we're being selfish on the other side. And so I think that it's just a priority thing. And so it's not that I have an issue going to whatever ice cream shop or pizza place or things like that. I mean, we lived in Florida for a while, and there was this family that had moved from Chicago, and they had this true Chicago deep dish pizza. It took them like an hour and 40 minutes to cook it. Our kids were all under 5 at that point in time, 3 boys under 5, or 5 and under, I guess. And we would go and sit and just wait because it wasn't cheap. But it was a great experience. And I love pizza, and I loved that experience. And so I'm not saying there's anything wrong in that space. My tension comes if we're not being faithful to the Father and we're being faithful to ourselves. Are we missing the bigger picture? To me, it's a heart issue, and so I definitely when I got to thinking about it more throughout the week, I could see where it came across as like I'm being grumpy old man, get off my lawn, and it really was more about a heart issue towards the Father, not an issue of what we spend and what we don't.
Yeah, I agree with that. Robert, I do have a question that I think ties along with that. I know back when I was the lead pastor of churches full time, it was everything that I did and everything that I was about. I would have this feeling like almost the thought that you needed to tithe to the church and to the church alone. This is God's work. And I would have people all the time that would say, yeah, we're very generous givers, but we give to a lot of different things. We give to a lot of different projects, a lot of different people. And when I was younger, that bothered me. And now that I'm older and involved in a lot of different things, a lot of different organizations, we have our budget, we have the money that we have for our tithe, and some of that goes to the local church, some of that goes to missions organizations that we support, some of that we have like a fund that if there's a need that people need, that we have this money that we can use that is going to help an organization or even an individual family that has a need. What are your thoughts on designation of where your giving should go?
Yeah, and I would say I'm probably a touch, probably considered old school in thinking on this, and I think it's just here's my thought. If you're going to be a part of the local church and expect it to run and function and do, so I've had people, most of my life has been in the church, has been in student ministry. And so we would have families that would miss 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row, and then they would show up, and and we'd had 100 students, and I'm not like that's just the size church I was in at that point in time. But we'd had 100 students like almost every week while those families were gone. Well, those families would show up, and it would be fall break for one of the schools that was an hour, and we'd have 50 students or 45 students, which is still bigger than the vast majority of churches in the country. And they'd be like, where's everybody at? We're so mad. And I'm going like, we've had double this many kids for the last, where have you been the last 5 weeks? I mean, like, and I never said it that way, but it was that mentality of like, why is this not here for me? Why am I not reaping the benefits of this monstrous, these more students and the bigger worship or all these things that are happening? And I'm like, but you're not here all the time and you're missing out on these things. And I think that tension sometimes hits inside of giving as well, as people want the church to be excellent and they want the church to do so much more, but yet they're not faithful to the church when it comes to those things. And then they're going, well, I guess I probably should give somewhere else because I don't see you doing this. And I'm going, you're not giving anywhere. And so I guess giving is better than not. I think this is a monstrously long conversation that we would need to spend a lot of time navigating through a lot of scriptures and a lot of things. But I still feel like that moving through and thinking is that we start with the church, the local church. And I'm not against a lot of parachurch. I'm not against any, I shouldn't say any, that's a rough statement. There's probably some I disagree with. I'm not against parachurch ministries and things like that. I've been a part of them vast majority of my life as well. But I think if the church was doing what it was supposed to do, most of them wouldn't need to exist. And the tension kind of comes into the fact of that, one, the church has been lazy, but two, people haven't supported the church. But even before a lot of these parachurch ministries and things were there. And so I do see generosity as a step above. I kind of separate tithing and generosity, and I said that last week. I think tithing is our support of the local church. I believe we should be a part of the local church. I think it's something that the scriptures encourage us to do. But also in that space, I think that we are to be generous above and beyond that. And And those are a hard balance. And so, like I had somebody recently do something for us. My boys were going on a mission trip and somebody gave, and they were like, yeah, I just float my tithe. And I thought, man, that would be like, as a pastor, that is really hard. Like for like you just like one week all of a sudden it's going, oh, you tithe this every week. And even though I don't see those numbers at my church, I see the overarching number. And all of a sudden it's just like, oh, hey, you're down $300 in a small church. That is monstrous for you for a week or something like that. And so if I feel like the consistency would be the big deal. And so even if we want to get away from the 10th, hey, I'm going to tithe, I'm going to do 10%, and 6% of that is going to go to the local church, and 2% of that's going to go to this missionary, and 1% of that's going to go to this organization, and another 1% is going to go to this organization. And I'm faithful and consistent in that, because it's very, very complicated for the church, parachurch ministries, missions people, or missions organizations and individuals that are out to do ministry when they're unsure if you're going to be faithful or you're going to be giving in that moment. I said faithful, and I probably mean that word. If you're going to be faithful in that moment, or if you're going to move that to something else. So those are just my thoughts.
Robert, what are your thoughts when it comes to giving on designated giving within the church? I was always frustrated. And in fact, when I was leading a church, I didn't allow designated giving. When someone comes and says, we're going to tithe, we're giving our money, but in the memo note, this is only for children's ministry, or this is only for student ministry. What are your thoughts on that?
We don't allow that either. There are some moments like that we will set up, like our
missions trip coming up.
Like our student mission trip. We had a drop down that people were helping or people were sponsoring and helping kids go on this mission trip. I mean, we took literally, I think it was almost 60 students on this mission trip. And I mean, and all of them and fees had gone up, and it was pretty inexpensive. I mean, it was in states. It was about 3 or 4 hours from where we live. But, I think it was like $350 a kid. And that was just, and they were giving us a deal because we had been a few years with this organization. And so, I mean, that's a lot of money for 70 people to have to come up with. And so leaders and kids, we had about that much money. And so a lot of people were generous. And, my boys, like they just sat almost in shock at the generosity of people, and they were able to cover their trips and a bunch more. So we don't allow that overall, because again, it's almost the conversation we were just having. Somebody wants to take and kind of step in and go, oh, hey, I'm just going to shift this over here. Well, the church needs to function, and there might just be a week that the church needs to pay the power bill. And if your tithing week is the week that children's ministry thing hits, and if you've got a children's ministry of 10 kids, 15 kids, 20 kids in a small church, you might not need 10 grand a year to fund that ministry. You might not need 7 grand a year to fund that ministry. And you've got somebody who's crazy generous in the church, who's given 2 grand, 4 grand of twice a month, something like that. And all of a sudden they tie up $25,000 to $45,000 that could be moving ministry forward, that could be doing good things in the community. I think it's really tough. So I echo what you're saying. It's just something we didn't do.
Yeah, I've had to have some difficult conversations on that before.
Yeah.
That counters come and say, hey, what do we do with this? Or accountant comes and bookkeeper comes and says, what do we do with this? It's tagged to this. This is the 3rd week in a row that they've done this, or 3rd month in a row, and had to sit down with the people and say, we don't do this. And here's why we don't do this. And one time we actually lost a family because of that, because they said that they wanted to support this particular ministry, and it's what they wanted their money going to. And if their money, and they couldn't grasp the idea that without the overarching, that there's a budget that the church has that supports that ministry that they're excited about, and their tithe going into the general fund a great portion of that is budgeted for that ministry, and they just couldn't grasp it. They said, no, I only want my money going for this. This is the ministry that I'm involved in. This is where I serve, and this is what I want to be a part of. And we just said, I'm sorry, that's not how we operate. And without the overall church budget, that ministry doesn't exist. So you can't have one without the other. And so that's just not the way that things work. And it ended up not ending well.
Yeah. And you and I've been you and I've had the privilege of being in a lot of different sized churches, and you've actually been in a couple churches that are way larger than a couple that I've been in. But at the end, you start getting to some larger churches where you have several hundred children on a weekend. I mean, those budgets, just the sheer amount of good gracious, coloring sheets and digital print offs or paper, hardstock print offs. I have no words this morning in my brain, apparently, like the handouts and all the things that you do. If you're going to do an art or a craft, all the supplies that comes in that space, just putting the production on has such a high thing. When you start looking at staffing and all this stuff, like, it can be a significant amount of money, more than what my church's entire budget is right now. Just for children's ministry. And sometimes in a space like that, you can take and go, okay, we've got one person who the budget for our children's ministry is $200,000 a year. And we've got one person that's given $85,000 a year to, those are very generous people, by the way. They're giving a fourth, they're giving $50,000 a year or something like that to this one space. Well, we can just take then and their money's there and it doesn't go past the budget. And so we're going to take and do that. And so you've got some crazy generous person giving $50,000 a year, it's fourth of your budget. Well, you get to a smaller church where the whole budget for the entire thing is $200,000. And that's your staff and all your power, water, everything that goes on. And you've got one person who takes $15,000, $20,000 and takes up that and designates that to something. Legally, you kind of have to go that way, unless there's something very specific in your bylaws and things like that say we don't do this, we don't designate funds, and then you can get around it. But there's got to be a lot of forethought in that.
Yeah.
Like, somebody really can cripple your ministry, and I hate to say it that way, but they can really cripple your ministry. And I think, Tony, it says a lot for you guys, and I'm super thankful for the leaders, the men and women financially that lead our organization, that have set up things very intentional to move the ministry forward and not let us get in a spot where we're kind of caught, going, man, I don't know how we fund this because all our money's tied up in worship or something.
Yeah, and I also think it gives an insight into the heart of the giver when that's the case, which is a good segue into the next segment that I wanted to talk about, and that's giving as a metric of church health. We've spent quite a bit of time on this show talking about metrics of church health, and we did a couple of episodes talking about why giving shouldn't be one of your primary metrics of church health as to how your church is overall going. We've talked a lot about the ABCs, attendance, building, and cash, and how cash, we tend to say that if giving isn't reaching that $14 per person or $17 per person average, that we're spiritually not doing what we should be as a congregation to grow our people in discipleship. And we've talked a lot about how we need to shift from that a lot of times. But a rebirth moment that I had, excuse me, in ministry many, many years ago is I used to, as a leader in the church, never want to see giving at all. I saw the blanket number of here's what we brought in every week. But for probably the first 10, 12 years of my ministry, I didn't see who gave, who didn't give, what they gave in any kind of way. And then I was at some conference. I don't remember if it was at a Catalyst conference, if it was at Leadership Summit. I don't remember what it was at. I was at some conference and went to a breakout seminar that completely shifted my thoughts on that this conference, the speaker, and I don't remember who it was, said that it's one of the greatest insights that we have into people's spiritual health, because if you have someone and personal health even more than spiritual health, that if someone is a consistent giver and you see that, and then all of a sudden their giving stops or changes drastically, that gives you a little, maybe there's something going on in their life. And so that it gives you an opportunity to go and say, hey, is something going on? You've been giving $100 a month for the last 50 months, and now all of a sudden it's stopped or it's dropped to $25. Is something going on there? Is something happening in your life? And the person says, well, actually, I lost my job, and I didn't want to tell you about that. But since you brought it up, and it can give you insights into what people are doing, what people are going through, what people are experiencing. And I never personally got into the receiving a report of what each individual family was giving, what they were doing, but I did change to seeing, do they have a giving record? Does this family have a giving record or not?
So we get that at our church. We get like once a quarter. Sorry, I just went blank on the time frame. Like we get an Excel sheet, and all it has is names down the side, and it shows the last 12 months, and it just has a check mark on whether they tithed in that month or not. And so I see that, and there's definitely a space. It's hard sometimes because a husband will give, and all of a sudden I'm like, this guy like gives all the time. I know they're crazy generous and they tithe, and we talk about it, and there's like 7 months, and I'll go scrolling down the list and went, oh, his wife tithed those 7. So sometimes just depending on who clicks the button is where it goes. But no, Tony, I'm with you 100% on that. I think that it's been really good for us. We actually are encouraged as pastors by our financial and our leadership, financial leadership and our overall leadership, to just write a thank you note and just say, hey, we appreciate, and your support and generosity and your obedience. But no, I love that part of that conversation. But anyway, sorry.
It messed me up for quite a while, I'll be honest, because when I first got that report, and again, I hadn't received anything like that ever. And then I got that first report, and I looked, and there were we had people on our staff. We had people that were key leaders in our church that had zero giving record. They had never in the life of our church given to the church. And I can remember one guy who was on the list was one of my 4 like key top leaders. And in 5 years, he had never given. And we'd gone through a capital giving campaign. All this stuff that he had stood up in front of the church and talked about the importance of giving in our giving campaign. He had encouraged others and, spoken on that. And he himself had never, we had staff people, like I said, that had never given. And so in some of those situations, I had to have some very hard conversations, uncomfortable conversations, saying, hey, explain this to me. What's going on here? And they were very offended that I had seen that information and that I knew that and was coming at them with that. And, but it was hard. And at the other side of that, then I also saw faithfulness in people that I was like, wow, that's shocking to me. That's very encouraging to see where they're at, because I knew where they were at in their faith journey. And the fact that it was something that they picked up that they saw as important was, I think, really showed a lot about their spiritual maturity.
And I think that's one of the things, like what you're talking about there, like for us and for the people, it's a heart thing. So for us on we just talked about it a little bit for the person who's giving, whether that's us or other people in the church, we should all be in that mode. It's a mindset. It's a heart thing of whether we do, whether we don't, how much we give, how much we don't. But at the same time, as a pastor, and this is something that I agree with you 100%, it is interesting and it's hard, and I have to guard my heart because, you have some people, we've all got people like this, that make it very clear how they live their life, and that it's extravagant and vacations and all this stuff. And then you'll see, like, I don't see numbers, and I'm just going to be really transparent. My heart probably couldn't handle that. I don't know that and I'm just being honest. God will, and I believe will grow me in that space. But right now, I don't want to see the numbers of, oh, hey, family A gives $100 a week, and family B gives 500 a week, and family C, and then I'm just sitting here monitoring. Well, why'd that go up? Oh, they were on vacation this month, and they must need an extra lobster money or something. I don't want to be in that space right now. But I'm I just think that it's a hard thing for us as pastors. And again, I'm just admitting a little bit of a flaw for me right now in a place I'm trying to grow is how do I reflect into the right place? And I think we have to step back, and then we've got to be able to do what you just said. We've got to be able to have some hard conversations occasionally. I mean, and it's really tough to talk to staff but it's really tough to talk to staff. It's incredibly hard to talk to a high level volunteer who is doing things, a deacon, an elder, somebody like that, and going, hey, when you signed on, like the conversation was, here's the 3, 4, 5 things that as a church we believe you need to be faithful in, and you're not in this space, and so we still want you here, but like A has to change, or B, you can't stay in this leadership role at this season of your life, and that's hard. That's really hard to do.
So what would your response be when someone came back and said, all right, but I give to this organization and I'm involved in this thing and we did this and so we are giving, we're just not giving here. We're very generous. And or the one that I heard a lot is, do you know how much time we give to the church? Not all of tithing, not all of generosity is with writing a check. And that's something that we preached constantly, that maybe you don't have money to give, but you can give of your time and your talents. And it's something that you talked about even a couple of weeks ago as well. And so when you get that response, how do you react and respond to that?
So one, I tried to be very intentional, and maybe I botched it. And so, excuse me. Maybe I botched it. And so, like I did talk about time, talent, and treasures. And, I talked about the fact that it's interesting to me that time is the one thing that all of us have the exact, some die earlier, some die later, but we get 24 hours a day. Our time day in, day out is exactly the same. But we tend to almost be a touch more giving with that than we do our resources, our treasures. Talent. We all know people who have taken a ton of voice lessons or had a lot of training in a certain sport or talent or something like that, and they may be worse after the training than they were when they started. Some of us have different talents, and there are people who can hop on a stage and speak or sing or do. There's people who can there's people who sit with like newborns and they pray over and read scripture and sing over them. Their voices are terrible, but their heart is beautiful. And that's not something everybody can do. So I think that the thing is that time and talents, while it's only so much time and talents can be limited, we actually can always make more money. It's not easy always. It's not like I'm saying, oh, hey, here's 2 side hustles. You can make an extra 20 grand a year each. Like it's a little bit of work, but we can make more money and we can manage our money differently and do some things that kind of change that space. I think I'll go back to what I said. Like it's really, really hard to look at the church and go, hey, I believe in what we're doing, but I'm not going to give to this. And I also very intentionally, and I know I said this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about this topic, when I was talking about this topic, I disassociate tithing and generosity. I think that those words have kind of been hybrided too much. And I think that there is a tithing that is an obedience of a first fruit. And I think generosity is above and beyond. And so I do hold, and again, maybe, I don't know, somebody might sit with me and go through a bunch of scriptures and show me differently. But I would be willing to pray through that and sit. I still feel that like the scriptures, and even from the Old Testament, when you start journeying through Genesis, and then when you move in to this space in the New Testament with, a lot of Paul, a little bit of Peter. You kind of step into these spaces of, I believe the church is where, that tithe, that 10% goes. But the thing I would say to this one specific thing is if we're talking about somebody in leadership, they signed off on this. Like if we had the conversation and they signed off, they don't get to go, well, we decided that blank ministry over here deserves our money more than this or needs our money more than this. That's not what you signed on for. You signed on because it's just, and call it hypocritical, call it what you want, and we're all hypocrites. I get that. But like we can't, it's very hard to call people to accountability on something we're unwilling to be held accountable to ourselves. And so that's just my thought on a couple of those things.
So I had two quick stories that I'll share with you, and then I want to get your thoughts on. When I told you that I got this report, and it blew my mind, I had a key staff person who was not on there. And so that was something that I needed to sit down and have a conversation. And they told me that they didn't feel comfortable giving their tithe to the church where he worked because he felt like he was essentially just giving his money right back to himself. And so that they tithed, they gave it to other organizations and other things that they were a part of, but that they felt like it was fraudulent to be giving their money back to the church where he worked because his tithe was being used to pay his paycheck every month. And then I sat in another conversation that got very heated. It was with a church that we were doing some consulting with, and we were breaking down some things that they wanted to do in their strategic plan and how they were going to do it. And one of those things was doing a series on generosity and tithing because it was something that they hadn't done in years, and their giving was not matching up with the metrics of what you typically want to see for spiritual health in a church. And so in talking through what they were going to do, it was one of those things. And one of their leaders made the comment, he said, well, I don't give financially, but I give of my time. And the pastor who was in the meeting said, well, why don't you? He said, well, if you break it down, here's what I make in my job. I make $27 an hour. I'm giving as a volunteer in this church. I'm giving, 5-7 hours a week. So you take that $27 an hour times that 7 hours a week. That's way more than my 10% of what I'm doing. And you're getting that in time from me. And he said, I think we have a lot of people that are doing that. And it resulted in a very heated conversation that I was really proud of the pastor of the church, that he said, I don't understand why you're so heated about this. To me, the fact that you're so argumentative about this shows that the Holy Spirit is convicting you that you're in the wrong here. There's no reason for you to be this animated and heated about this discussion. If you feel good about what you're doing, then that's between you and the Lord. And that has nothing to do with me. If you truly feel peace about that you're giving what you should be, but the fact that you're so animated and so angry about this leads me to believe that the Holy Spirit is trying to tell you something.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I always I shouldn't say always, I'm more recently in a space of when those types of conversations come up, I try and take a deep breath and that is a try, but I just kind of go, give me the scripture on that. Like walk me through how you feel like, I can, my hourly rate is the metric of giving that I can do. And so, and it's always an intriguing conversation and a space to kind of work through with someone when you're sitting in those moments. Yeah, with the staff person, I kind of still go back to the fact of that if the thing was, I look at a lot of job descriptions and things like that. I have friends who are hiring and I'm always reading through their job descriptions. They're like, hey, we're hiring for this position. Tell me your thoughts on what we asked for with A, B, and C. And I just scroll through, and sometimes that inspires me to do a Google search of like jobs that are there and just looking at other job descriptions that people say. And there's a lot of job descriptions now that are being very intentional about the fact of that you will tithe/give to this church, to this local church, to blank, insert church name here. And I'm like, that's an interesting trend to see, that we're hiring not just part-time volunteers, like not just an organist who's playing, 10 hours a week or 10 hours a month, something like that. These are lead pastors.
So then pastors. In that situation, does the giving come from a response to what the Holy Spirit, what the Lord has done for them, or is it out of obligation that this is what is required of me by my job?
My question is like, is there a part, and I would think this is actually, I feel like this would be scriptural, like that we should do the right thing. I'm going to do what's right till I do it for the right reason. Like, I mean, I think that if God would want us to do the right thing, even if we're struggling through it, until he either shifts our heart or he moves us on from the place because we're going, this just isn't what's good. But again, I don't think we can sign on. I mean, I don't think we can sign on to something if we know that's the rule. We don't get to sign on and go, ha ha, I'll show you, which is, I think, such a what
Yeah,
people do.
I think there's a difference between a healthy reservation. Okay, so I'm looking at my budget, and man, we've got bills that are piling up that I don't know how we're going to pay this month, but I really want to be faithful to the church. Maybe this month we can't afford to give. No, this is something that's really important to us, and it hurts. Not sure that this is the prudent thing to do, but we're going to stay faithful even though it's difficult. And man, I really don't know. Maybe even it's a conversation with the wife of saying, I don't think we should. Well, I really think we should. And finally we decide, okay, we're going to do this, even though we're not really doing it out of a spirit of gratitude, but more out of, this is something that we committed to and we're really for, and we're trusting in the Lord to do this. I think there's a difference between that, which I think a lot of people have a lot of times, and I'm being forced to do this. My job is doing this, so I'm doing it and just checking it off a box. I don't know that there's a growing, a maturity that comes in that. It's more just well, this is a requirement that I have, and so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, man, this is going to sound harsh. I would probably, that latter person, I would probably say go work somewhere else. Like go to Lowe's, go to a different church that doesn't care where you tithe or give or you're generous or whatever. I think it was Dallas Willard, and I'm reading a lot of Dallas right now, getting ready for a sermon. So this is where my life is. Maybe it wasn't him, but um, like the Lord's Prayer, give us today our daily bread. And it might have been John Mark Comer that said this, that just the whole thing is, there are so many of us that our daily life is so controlled and we have everything we need that there's no margin for the Lord to work. And I think when we're sitting in a place and we're going, oh man, and look, I'm not arguing, and I love where you took that conversation of the fact of a couple, because man, there's moments and seasons in mine and Melissa's life where we've gone, how do we do this? I mean, this is a tension, this is a space, and thankfully we've been generous and we grow and we move through those things, but like, this give us today our daily bread. And I think Jesus was kind of reflecting in this Proverbs 30 where, it's, don't give me more than I need, or I'll forget about you. Don't give me less than I need, or I'll, curse you and, say all these terrible things and walk away, but give me my daily bread, meet the need I've got. And there's so many of us that when it comes, and I'm not saying that retirement's a bad thing. I'm not saying a 401k, look into your future. I'm not saying any of that stuff's bad. I'm saying that like in the daily living and then in the grind, like so many of us are just concerned of like, is tomorrow taken care of, that we forget to live in today. And we forget the fact that God really wants to work and do and move and do something big in our life. And so I agree with both of those scenarios. I don't know that it's the best case scenario, but to the one, I would be their biggest cheerleader. And if they gave 1%, I would celebrate that like the widows might with them. And then on the other hand, if a person's kind of like, oh, I don't feel like I should give here, I'd be like, there's a lot of jobs. I mean, I hope one of them really blesses you. And if this is where we are, and I know that kind of can seem arrogant or mean or disrespectful or something, but that's probably where I would be on those two sides of that situation.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen churches before, and maybe this is what you're referring to with the churches that you were discussing, that out of your paycheck that you make $50,000 a year, and out of your paycheck we take your taxes come out of your paycheck. Out of your paycheck we take your retirement matching, which not enough churches do, by the way.
Agreed.
We'll just state that not enough churches do you contribute, and we'll match that up to 3% or whatever that number is. And then out of your paycheck, we're also taking 10% that is going back to the tithe. I think that
now I think that's crazy.
Well, I've seen churches do that, and I don't know that there's anything different but that and saying in your employee contract, in your contract of employment, you're signing that you will give 10% back to the church. And I just wonder, so where then does 2 Corinthians come in, where it says each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give? Don't give out of compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. That again, if you're being forced to do it, is it really coming out of your heart and out of generosity? I don't give my taxes graciously. I don't pay my taxes out of a cheerful heart of saying, oh, wow, I'm so thankful for all that the government does for me, and here's what I'm giving back. No, they require me to do it. Now, if they didn't require me to do that, would I still pay taxes? If they said, you can give whatever you want, maybe, probably not as much as I'm required to do.
Yeah.
But I probably still would do something because I see the value in that. I see the benefit in that. And you hope that if someone is really following Jesus, that they're seeing what the Holy Spirit is doing in their life and doing in the lives of their family. They see what the local church is doing for their kids, what it's doing for them, what it's doing for the community, and they want to be a part of that. And so they cheerfully, graciously want to give because they want to be a part of that. We've both seen people that have given way more than 10%, and that they're just abundantly generous because they're so gracious for what the Lord is doing in their heart. And I just don't know that saying we are forcing you, requiring you to do this, that sure, it's great for the bottom line of the church. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong. And I would love to hear from some of our listeners that maybe this was their experience. I'm just not sure that, like you said, that you do it until the heart changes. I don't know that the heart is ever going to change to where you're going to say, oh, now I'm thankful that the church is doing this because now I want to do it. I think that it really is a measure of spiritual discipline, and it really is a sight into our soul and our spiritual health.
Well, and I think that for me, like in this conversation, like you're talking about spiritual disciplines there, and I just, again, reading some stuff this week and working through some stuff on, the sermon for this coming Sunday is, one of our, at the end of our values, the last week should be the end. I mean, it's the last week of our value series. And we're talking about making disciples, and I just, in reading this week, this whole statement of how many churches, and this author, and is Dallas, and he just said, like, I've been churches all over, and I've never seen one that has a strategic plan to teaching them everything I've commanded you. And like, the reality is it's just this teaching everything I've commanded you in this space. And I just wonder sometimes, though, in the fact of, like, if we're talking about milk and meat here, if we're getting into the conversation of some of you are still on milk and you need to be eating steak. I mean, you need to be moving to something that's different, and you want to navigate this maturity thing, but yet you still are drinking milk, then it's like we have to treat, oh my goodness, this is hard, but hey, this is what it is. Like, we have to treat them like what they are. They're children that are drinking milk and they're not mature and moving in. And so with my kids, I didn't look at them and them just get $45 when they started mowing a yard or something like that and go, hey man, do with it what you want. Fist pump, good job. It was, you need to be tithing. This is here's where this is. Here's why this works. Here's what we do. Here's why we're faithful in this space, because we're trusting God to do something that our job is more than just a job. It has a kingdom purpose, and we're working in and moving in that space. And so, I mean, if somebody is angrily not giving, because I feel like that's what we're saying here. I mean, it's just like, I'm not doing this, or I'm not there, or it's this. That's a maturity. And that's kind of, I mean, even like you said, I'm going to do it till the heart changes. It's not I mean, that's a maturity thing. Everything in my life that isn't aligned to the Father is a maturity thing for me. It's growth. It's a struggle. And as I mature and grow in the understanding of the scriptures and the Father and the model of Jesus, then I shift to a more mature being. And that's a tension for me. And so I don't, I'm not sure how some of that plays out and stuff. I just think that like in a lot of these spaces, it goes where we started. It's like, what are you giving to? And if you're eating out 10 times a week, or if you're doing this, I mean, it's all these things, but yet you're saying, I can't afford to tithe. It's a priority issue. That's a maturity thing. Pack your lunch. I've had to do that in seasons. I still do that a lot of times. And so I do those things so that I can be faithful and generous and stuff in other things. And so those are just some decisions that we've made and done throughout the years, to find ourselves in a place that we're honoring and faithful and obedient in that.
If this is such an important issue in the overall life of the church, the functionality of the church, and it's also such an important issue when we're talking about discipleship and spiritual health, why does the church not talk about it enough? Why do we reserve it for maybe a short series once a year, if that?
Yeah. I think it's...
You said yourself, Jesus talks about it.
More than any other topic that he discusses. Yeah. And so I think that we just kind of get into that space to where people will leave if we talk about it all the time, because they don't want to hear it. But it goes back to the verse, the Corinthians verse you were talking about. You reap what you sow. I mean, it's like, and so people get frustrated, and it's probably the same thing for the church. We maybe see people struggling to tithe and be generous because we're sowing other parts of the scripture, things that maybe were less important to I shouldn't say less important. Is that, I don't know, things that Jesus talked about less, not less important, but he mentioned them less. We spend more time in those types of things than we do in the things that he spent more time on. And I mean, there's just no doubt in the world that, like, if you plant corn, you're not going to go out in 6 weeks and have potatoes. You're going to have corn. And I think that's the thing about that verse when you start to step in and look at, like, if you sow sparingly, you reap sparingly. If you sow generously, you reap generously. And the question I would have for people is if they feel like, hey, I'm reaping a ton of generosity, you can go stick it. I'm not changing what I'm doing. Okay, but like, are you really seeing the full fruit of God blessing and working in your life? And I think there's some things that, like, we just have to look at what we're sowing, and if we're sowing, that $7 coffee, which is ridiculous to me that a coffee costs $7 anymore when I'm driving down the road and I grab one occasionally. It's just crazy to me that they cost that. But if you're getting a $7 coffee 4 times a week, and I just think there's some things like you're reaping what you're sowing in those spaces.
Well, Robert, I really want to dive into some practical tips that we can toss out there for our listeners, for church leaders, on how they can not only improve their church finances, but how they can overcome financial struggles that their church might be having. Because there's not a lot of church leaders that I meet with that say, "Oh, we've got an abundance of giving. Things are
raking
great
in
right
bank."
now." I think that we're going to have to turn this into a 3-parter, which is kind of fitting because it took us a month to get to this topic, and so we might as well spend a month on this topic. Most churches, when they do a series on generosity and tithing, they'll give it about 2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3 weeks.
So we're doing as much, if not maybe more. We'll see how this goes next week.
Our pastor gear has kicked in. We're doing 3 weeks on money. That's it.
That's right. So
and we pushed it off for a month before we talked
today. And we want to thank you for listening to this edition of the Small Church Podcast. I do want to remind you, as we're on the topic of generosity, that we are doing our annual All for One campaign, where we're looking for 100 individuals to make a one-time gift of $100. If you would like to participate in that, if you value the work of the Small Church Podcast and Higher Ministries, you can visit higherministries.com and click on the links for the All for One campaign, and you can make your donation right there. We want to thank you for listening. Tune tune in next week as we continue the conversation on tithing and generosity within the church. Please take time to like our podcast, share our podcast, subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to tune in again next week as Robert and I continue this discussion on tithing and generosity. It's something I'm sure that you won't want to miss. Thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your week.